In an era where America's wealth was built on the backs of enslaved people, one black man was on Wall Street, building an empire. They called him the Prince of Darkness. He was a genius, a swindler, and a man who went head-to-head with the most powerful tycoons of his time. While history books were being written about Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, they left out the story of Jeremiah G. Hamilton, the man who amassed a fortune that would be worth $250 million today. This is the story of how he did it. The year is 1875. In a lavish Manhattan mansion, an old man takes his final breath. His name is Jeremiah G. Hamilton, and his death sends a shockwave through the city's elite. When his will is read, the numbers are staggering. He leaves behind an estate valued at $2 million. In today's money, that's not just rich. That's $250 million. But here's the unbelievable truth that history tried to forget. Jeremiah Hamilton was a black man. In a country still reeling from slavery, where black codes and violent racism were the law of the land, Hamilton didn't just survive. He conquered the most ruthless game of all, Wall Street. He was a man of immense contradictions, despised by some, grudgingly respected by others, and a mystery to all. He owned stocks in railroads he wasn't allowed to ride. He married a white woman when it was a taboo that could get him killed, and he became the only man the great Cornelius Vanderbilt ever admitted to fighting to a standstill. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about power, defiance, and the audacious strategies of a man who played a rigged system and won. So how did a man with no family name, no inherited wealth, and the quote-unquote wrong skin color become one of the richest people in America? The answer lies in a series of brilliant, dangerous, and often morally questionable moves that began with a crime punishable by death. To understand the predator, you have to understand the jungle. The Wall Street of the 1830s and 40s wasn't the buttoned-up, regulated institution we know today. It was a chaotic, unregulated battlefield. Fortunes were made and lost in a single day based on rumors, back-alley deals, and outright manipulation. There was no SEC, no insider trading laws. Information was a weapon, and the men who wielded it best were the ones who came out on top. Think of it as the Wild West of American capitalism, a place where panics, crashes, and booms were as common as the seasons. It was a world built by and for powerful white men. Into this arena walked a ghost, Jeremiah G. Hamilton. No one truly knew where he came from. Some records suggest he was born in the West Indies, possibly Haiti, around 1807. Others whisper he was born a slave in Richmond, Virginia. The truth is, Hamilton himself was a master of obscuring his own past, creating fictions and hiding facts to keep his enemies and his allies perpetually off balance. He was a man without a verifiable origin, which in the class-obsessed society of 19th century New York was a profound disadvantage. Or was it? For a man like Hamilton, being a phantom was a form of power. He couldn't be defined by a lineage, so he would define himself by his actions. And his first major action was a spectacular crime. In 1828, at just 21 years old, Hamilton first appears in historical records not as a businessman, but as a fugitive. A group of white New York merchants had hired the young, charismatic Hamilton as a frontman for a daring scheme to smuggle counterfeit Haitian coins into Port-au-Prince. He chartered a ship and set sail. The plan, however, had a fatal flaw. The counterfeit coins were too good. When a suspicious bank clerk assayed them, he found their silver content was actually higher than that of the genuine currency. The conspiracy unraveled instantly. Word got out that authorities were coming for him. A captain and 6 armed soldiers were dispatched to the dock to make the arrest. But Hamilton was always one step ahead. Tipped off just in time, he desperately started dumping sacks of the counterfeit coins out of a porthole into the harbor. Before the soldiers could reach him, he vanished. For 12 agonizing days, he skulked around the Port-au-Prince harbor, a man with a death sentence on his head, sheltered by local black fishermen, who saw in him perhaps a shared struggle against a hostile world. He finally managed to sneak aboard a New York-bound vessel and escape, leaving behind a Haitian court that sentenced him, in absentia, to be shot on sight if he ever returned. He arrived back in New York, not as a failure, but as a man who had stared into the abyss and survived. He had a bounty on his head, but also claimed to have escaped with $5,000 of the counterfeit coin. More importantly, he had a reputation. The city's black elite and their newspaper, Freedom's Journal, publicly condemned him as a base villain, a disgrace to the race for his criminal activities. But in the cutthroat world of downtown Manhattan, his notoriety was a different kind of currency. He had proven he was audacious, he could keep his nerve under pressure, and he wouldn't give up the names of the powerful white men who had hired him. This failed scheme didn't ruin him. It was his brutal, baptism-by-fire initiation into the world of high-stakes finance. He had learned a critical lesson. Risk, when managed correctly, was the fastest path to reward. He was now ready to take on New York, not as a frontman for others, but as the master of his own destiny. For the next few years, Hamilton struggled to find his footing in New York's lily-white financial world. A trail of lawsuits over unpaid debts paints a picture of a man living on the edge, borrowing frantically, sweet-talking creditors, and postponing payments with the skill of a seasoned poker player. To his detractors, he was a con artist, but to Hamilton, this was just business. He was honing his skills, learning the rhythm of the city's financial heartbeat, and waiting for his moment. That moment came, ironically, from a catastrophe. In 1835, the Great Fire of New York laid waste to Lower Manhattan. Flames consumed hundreds of buildings, wiping out businesses and fortunes. For most, it was a tragedy. For Jeremiah Hamilton, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. In the chaos and panic that followed, he moved with predatory precision. It's said he took pitiless advantage of several of the fire victims' misfortunes, making deals in the smoke-filled streets. While the exact details of his maneuvers are lost to history, he emerged from the ashes with a starting fortune. Within a year of the fire, through a mixture of shrewdness and what his victims loudly called fraud, Hamilton had amassed over $25,000, the equivalent of millions today. This was the genesis of the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life, the Prince of Darkness. It was a name whispered with a mixture of fear, contempt, and grudging admiration. It spoke not only to the color of his skin, which made him a terrifying anomaly in the halls of power, but to the ruthless and often shadowy nature of his methods. With his newfound capital, Hamilton graduated from small-time hustles to industrial-scale schemes. His next target was the marine insurance industry. The business was simple. A ship owner pays a premium, and if the ship sinks, the insurance company pays out. Hamilton saw a glaring loophole. He began buying ships, insuring them for more than they were worth, and then they would mysteriously sink. Time and time again, vessels associated with him would meet an unhappy fate at sea. The insurance companies cried foul, convinced they were being scammed, and they were almost certainly right. They dragged him to court, but Hamilton's legal footwork was as impressive as his financial maneuvering. In one legendary case, the city's insurance underwriters, tired of his constant claims, banded together and created a blacklist. They formally resolved not to insure any venture associated with Jeremiah G. Hamilton. This should have been the end of his scheme. For Hamilton, it was merely a puzzle. He found workarounds, using white businessmen as proxies to secretly insure his vessels. He beat them at their own game, using their own rules against them, and continued to collect. But these schemes were just the warm-up. Hamilton's true ambition was Wall Street itself. He couldn't join the New York Stock and Exchange Board. Its membership was closed to him because of his race. So he operated outside of it, in the less formal but equally ferocious world of the curb. He became a broker, a dealer in information and speculation. His strategy was twofold. First, he became an information vampire. He understood that in a market driven by rumor, confirmed information was like having the key to the vault. He developed a network of sources, clerks, printers, businessmen, and paid them for tips. He knew which companies were failing before the public did and which stocks were about to soar. This allowed him to buy low and sell high with uncanny accuracy. Second, he was a master of the corporate takedown. He would buy up shares in a company, often one that was already struggling, and then unleash a torrent of lawsuits. He'd challenge the company's management, question its books, and demand that a receiver be brought in to liquidate the assets and distribute them to the shareholders, namely himself. It was a form of corporate raiding, 150 years before the term became popular. It made him a pariah. Businessmen saw him as a wrecker, a man who produced nothing and only sought to tear down what others had built. But it was incredibly effective. This aggressive strategy put him on a collision course with the most powerful and feared tycoon of the age, Cornelius Vanderbilt. The Commodore, as he was known, was the king of American enterprise, a ruthless industrialist who had built a shipping and railroad empire from nothing. He was a man who didn't suffer rivals. Their most famous battle was over the Accessory Transit Company, a firm that controlled a vital shipping route through Nicaragua, a shortcut for prospectors heading to the California gold rush. Both Hamilton and Vanderbilt saw its immense value. A brutal stock market war erupted. Vanderbilt, with his immense resources, tried to squeeze Hamilton out, to crush him as he had crushed so many other opponents. But Hamilton wouldn't break. He fought back with every tool at his disposal: lawsuits, market manipulation, and sheer stubborn nerve. The battle was a clash of titans, and Wall Street watched in stunned amazement as the black broker went toe-to-toe with the Commodore. In the end, neither man could claim a decisive victory. But Hamilton had achieved something far more significant. He had earned Vanderbilt's respect. Years later, after Vanderbilt's death, a front-page obituary in the National Republican made a stunning admission. There was only one man who ever fought the Commodore to the end, and that was Jeremiah Hamilton. Vanderbilt himself named Hamilton as one opponent he truly respected. In the lion's den of Wall Street, Jeremiah Hamilton had faced down the biggest lion of them all and walked away his equal. By the 1860s, Hamilton was innovating again. He began running a pool, an early version of a modern hedge fund. He gathered money from a select group of wealthy white investors who, despite their personal prejudices, could not ignore his genius for making money. He used their pooled capital as leverage to borrow even more, allowing him to take huge, aggressive positions in the market. He was no longer just a player. He was a market maker, a man whose moves could dictate the fortunes of others. This was the pinnacle of his financial power. The Prince of Darkness was now a king in his own right. Jeremiah Hamilton's methods were undeniably controversial. He was called a swindler, a wrecker, and a man who profited from others' misfortune. But he was also operating in a system that was fundamentally rigged against him. So, the question is, was he a villain, or was he a revolutionary capitalist using the only tools available to him to beat the titans of Wall Street at their own game? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And while you're there, if you're enjoying this look into one of history's most fascinating and forgotten figures, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We have many more hidden histories to uncover together. By the 1850s and 60s, Jeremiah Hamilton was no longer just a Wall Street operator. He was an institution. He had amassed a fortune of $2 million, placing him in the exclusive club of New York's millionaires. His wealth afforded him a lifestyle that was a direct and defiant contradiction to the racial hierarchy of his time. He didn't just accumulate money, he used it to build a fortress of luxury around himself and his family. He married a white woman, Eliza, and together they raised a family of several children. In an era when interracial marriage was a dangerous taboo that could incite mob violence, their long-standing union was a testament to Hamilton's utter disregard for societal convention. They lived in an elegant mansion on East 29th Street and owned a sprawling country estate in rural New Jersey. His estate was a palace, featuring a 10-bedroom house with a ballroom, 2 private trout streams, and a fish pond. He was living a life of aristocratic splendor that most white men could only dream of. His very existence was an act of rebellion. He owned stock in railroad companies whose trains he was legally barred from riding in the main cabins. He invested in businesses that would have refused him service at their front door. He moved exclusively in white business circles, shunning contact with New York's black elite, who had ostracized him early in his career. This was not a man seeking acceptance. This was a man demanding dominance. He wasn't asking for a seat at the table. He was building a bigger, more lavish table of his own. His best friend was Benjamin Day, the white founder of the New York Sun, one of the city's most influential newspapers, a relationship that provided him with both companionship and a powerful public shield. But no amount of money could fully insulate him from the venomous racism of the era. He was a constant target. That hate boiled over in July of 1863, during the New York City Draft Riots. The city erupted into one of the most brutal and violent episodes in American history. The riots, ostensibly a protest against the new federal draft for the Civil War, quickly devolved into a racist pogrom. The largely Irish-American mobs, fueled by economic anxiety and racial animosity, turned their rage on the city's black population. For 5 days, the city was a war zone. Black homes and businesses were burned, an orphanage for black children was destroyed, and innocent black men were lynched in the streets. Jeremiah Hamilton, the richest black man in the country, was a prime target. An enraged mob, armed with clubs and stones, descended on his mansion. Their goal was clear: to lynch the man who represented everything they despised and envied. They broke into his home, a wave of violent hatred flooding into the opulent halls. But Hamilton, ever the survivor, was gone. He had escaped through a back door, vaulting over a fence, just moments before the mob could seize him. Inside, the mob was met by his wife, Eliza. In an act of incredible bravery and quick thinking, she faced down the rioters. She calmly told them her husband wasn't home. Then she placated the mob, offering them liquor and cigars from their collection. She even gave them one of Hamilton's old suits of clothes as a bizarre trophy. Her composure and audacity worked. The mob, momentarily satisfied, left the mansion and its occupants physically unharmed. The incident was a chilling reminder of the precarious reality of Hamilton's position. He could command the respect of Cornelius Vanderbilt, bend the legal system to his will, and live in a palace surrounded by wealth. But on the streets of the city, where he made his fortune, his life could be threatened at any moment simply because of the color of his skin. He had conquered Wall Street, but he could never fully conquer the racism that permeated American society. He survived the riots, but the event underscored the profound isolation of his existence. He lived out the rest of his days in immense wealth, a remote and enigmatic figure, dying in 1875, a king in a gilded cage. When Jeremiah G. Hamilton died, obituaries declared him the wealthiest colored man in the United States. His fortune was immense, a testament to a lifetime of audacious gambles, ruthless tactics, and unparalleled genius. Yet within a generation, his story began to fade. By the 20th century, he was all but invisible, a ghost erased from the grand narrative of American capitalism he had so thoroughly dominated. There are no known surviving photographs or commissioned portraits of him. The Prince of Darkness, so vivid and terrifying to his contemporaries, became a phantom once more. So, what is his legacy? It's a complicated one. Was he a hero? It's difficult to say. He didn't use his wealth to uplift his community. In fact, he actively distanced himself from it. He wasn't an activist or a philanthropist in the traditional sense. His methods were often predatory, and he seemed to have little compassion for those who stood in his way. But to label him a simple villain is to ignore the world he operated in. He was a black man in 19th century America. The game was rigged. The rules were written by his oppressors. The doors to legitimate power were barred and locked. Men like Cornelius Vanderbilt, celebrated as titans of industry, used tactics that were just as ruthless. Hamilton simply played their game, but with a degree of difficulty they could never imagine. He didn't break the rules of Wall Street. He mastered them. He took the greed, the corruption, and the racism of his era and forged them into weapons. His story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Is wealth a moral pursuit? Does systemic oppression justify questionable means? Perhaps Hamilton's true legacy is not as a hero or a villain, but as a mirror reflecting the raw, brutal nature of the American dream. He demonstrated that black excellence could not be suppressed, even under the most hostile conditions. He proved that genius is not bound by race, and that the mechanisms of power, even those designed for exclusion, can be seized by anyone audacious enough to try. The story of Jeremiah G. Hamilton is the untold story of the first Black Wall Street millionaire. It is the story of a man who looked at an impossible system and didn't ask for it to change. He simply decided to conquer it. He was a prince of darkness who fought his battles in the shadows, a man who built an empire in a land that refused to see him as a man, and in doing so, left behind a legacy as wealthy, as complex, and as haunting as the nation that tried to forget him. The story of Jeremiah Hamilton was largely hidden for over a century, but it's now being brought back to light. Recent books and even a planned HBO Max series produced by Don Cheadle and Steven Soderbergh are reintroducing him to the world. It's a testament to how many incredible stories are still buried in our history. What other forgotten figures should we explore? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of the people who truly built the world we live in today. Thanks for watching.